everybody, and welcome to the Goot Reaction. I'm your host, Joe Goot, and with me, as always, is my main man from the Midwest. This is going to be a show talking about the left versus the right, but in an interesting way. We've been chatting on and off for probably a couple weeks now, and this concept keeps coming up about how the left has way more power than, and we mean by the left, we mean the progressive wing of the party, for example, and change forward ideas, populism on the left. What the right often calls, Marxism and communism and fascism, which is just a hilarious way to position that, but because they don't really know what those terms mean. But that wing of the party and those types of ideas, the far left ideology of progressive change, having way more power and influence in the Democratic Party than it really does, and in society as a whole than it really does. And we wanted to explore that. Again, this idea just kind of kept coming up in various forms and little bits and pieces here and there through different conversations we've had. So we just thought, let's put it together in one big show and see what happens. Let's explore it from a number of different angles. And another aspect of that is just the difference between conservatism and progressivism, and how one ideology is about holding on to things from the past, really conserving um, really every aspect of society and current norms and ways of going about things, versus progressivism being about change and progress and more inclusivity and more equity amongst various groups. So yeah, we just wanted to get into those ideas and see where it takes us. So we had some big examples that we wanted to touch on, including healthcare, gun control, just the campaigning in general, and the positioning of those various ideologies and how they show up in campaigns, and how the right demonizes the left, and how that idea seems to stick, even though people like AOC, people like Jared Moskowitz, people like Ro Khanna, they are voices on the left in the party, but they don't really have the influence that the right seems to think, or makes us want to think that they have. So Triple M, let me throw it over to you, and why don't you get us started? Why don't you pick an area that we want to go through first here?
Sure, and I'm going to add to something you said there. You
Oh yeah.
kind of hit it there at the end. I think, like I said, as we talked, what made me think this might be a decent topic to dig into is like we said, that premise of, oh, we've got to rescue society from the left. The left has taken over society, and one question kept jumping into my head was when did that happen? Like, if we look at a lot of these key things you mentioned, healthcare, gun control, I would say the economy in general. We keep doing tax cuts for the
Mm-hmm.
rich, pushing this trickle down economics idea that has never proven to actually, benefit, never actually trickle down to anybody, that extensively. Is what aspects of where has the left taken over? I mean, I think the ideas have definitely started to permeate society a little more. Things like, you know, marriage equality,
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQ rights, transgender rights, and then
Yep.
there's such an immediate backlash to a lot of those ideas that, like I said, they're permeating, they're popular. If you look at polls on a lot of those things, they're popular, but they haven't actually resulted in legislation that, very, very much, or really anything that actually controls our society. So it's like, from that
Yeah.
angle, we wanted to push on it.
Yeah. Well, let me throw in one thing real quick. I think to give a great example of that is maybe certain states have really advanced more of a progressive angle, like with Tim Walz and having his more visibility into what he did in Minnesota, paid family leave, free breakfast and lunches for school kids, those types of things, more progressive policies that actually got enacted. But on the national level, you're absolutely right. We're not seeing any of that take over. We're not seeing, even though those are very, very popular policies, paid family leave for one, for example, I think polls at near 90%, and that's across both the left and the right in terms of people wanting a policy like that enacted at the federal level. But yet we're no closer to seeing that, pass than we were decades ago. So yeah, just wanted to throw that example out there.
That's a great example, and that's a great point that it does, and that's why it's worth discussing, right? Is maybe the answer
Yeah.
is, oh, hey, maybe it did take over at some point, and I'm a little blind to it, but no, but I think you hit a good point though. A lot of those places where those things have happened, they're very popular. No, the population of that area, it doesn't seem is clamoring to take those things away once they're implemented. And
Right.
you could argue the
Right.
same thing. Okay, so maybe healthcare is the first place we jump in.
Yeah.
The Affordable Care Act is extremely popular now that it's in place. It gave coverage to a lot of people. It, don't call it Obamacare because then it gets unpopular real quick, even though it's the same thing, everybody.
Yes.
I remember back to the discussions back in the 2009 2010 timeframe when it was getting passed and everything. There's all those discussions. They were talking about death panels, and I don't want some bureaucracy, deciding what health coverage I get and all that. And it got implemented. A lot more people got coverage. In a lot of cases, people that could have gotten coverage didn't, if the governors of the state didn't opt to accept the Medicare and Medicaid provisions for their state, which most often, I don't have the stats in front of me, but most often was decisions made by conservative Republican governors in those states opted not to include that coverage for people. A lot of things have transpired since then, but let's fast forward to the recent events of the healthcare CEO, United Healthcare CEO situation.
Yep.
Has to be said, we don't endorse the murder of anyone. We don't.
Yeah.
We would be in favor of people not needlessly dying.
Yeah. Hot take: murder is bad.
Yeah.
Always.
Yes. Officially, our stand. But the things you're hearing around it, people's feelings and people's sentiments and their situations, the examples of people's situations, they want better from their society and their government. Very much, it's a thing that the left has been pushing for a while. Is and we can argue about the solutions, whether universal health care is the right answer or it's, but some better option, which is what Obama was trying to do, and people prior to him were trying to do. And since he went in, we touched on this in another episode. Obama went into that whole fight trying to be able to negotiate with the other side. Went in with a plan that they had previously proposed. And that was a mistake. He should have went in with a very, very left plan, let them fight from the right and land somewhere in the middle. But he went in with a plan they very much, they had agreed with at some point, had proposed at some point. But now, because that was his bargaining position, they could argue for a worse version of it.
Whittle away at it. Yeah.
And a lot of people will argue that what actually got implemented with the Affordable Care Act, while it did help a lot of people, is still very much a conservative version of what could have been done for people. Didn't go far enough. Didn't offer a true public option. So I know Kyle Kalinske talked about it in one of his videos recently, where he was talking about the whole Ben Shapiro situation and the response from his listeners. There's a lot of people who seem to be very left in their views on what healthcare should be, but that's not what we have, right?
Yeah.
The left has not taken over healthcare in that regard, and you're seeing it play out in these discussions.
Yep.
So thoughts? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's a great summary of things as they are, and I do think it is funny how it's when you talk about, or let's say you just watch any media from CNN to then obviously something like a conservative podcast or something, how they position what the left wants as something radical, just something so crazy, so socialist. I'm like, so why are we the only industrialized nation on the earth that doesn't have some form of universal healthcare, doesn't have some kind of public option Is it because we're just that much better? No, it's because we're stubborn and then we put capitalism above all else. We look at what makes money for a handful versus what is the best for the majority. And I think that just is emblematic of so much of the different systems and the stuff that's set up in our country is, and you've said this a number of times, Triple M, that it's about asking the question, what is going to help the majority versus what is actually helping and benefiting a small number of people. And that's why we have kind of hinted at and touched at and outright discussed at various points how we're essentially a plutocracy, how we're being run by oligarchs, and these rich people at the top continue to benefit at the expense of the majority. And so I think the system that you're talking about is just, that status quo, even with the ACA in place, is better. It covers pre-existing conditions, which is a huge benefit. I think that was, to me, that was the number one positive out of all that. Obviously covering millions and millions more people, but just having that piece in place was massive, because I used to run into that all the time of having dealing with the depression and other conditions, and not getting adequate care because they said, "Oh no, that was already before when you had that other job." And with your health care tied to your job, you're kind of saddled with this, like, tough choice sometimes of like, hey, do I pursue a better opportunity, but do I lose my health care and then all of a sudden have to go on a different plan through a different carrier and not have those conditions covered in the same way that I have it currently? So, when you have to make choices like that, again, who does that benefit? It doesn't benefit you. It benefits the people that are taking your premiums and trying to deny you coverage to make more profits.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And when you have to go on a different plan like that, so maybe you took the new job, maybe that healthcare, if it's offered, denies you before the ACA, denies you due to the pre-existing condition. Then you have to go chase things like Cobra and some of those other
Yeah.
things that are out there that get more expensive. So then maybe you've lost the financial benefit. If the reason you took the new job was to make more money, which is often the case,
Yeah. Yeah.
you might have even lost that extra money that you gain from taking the new job because you got to pay more for healthcare.
Hmm.
And I think a way I would even add to something you said is, definitely does it help more people, does it help less people, but is the purpose of, is the reason the all the players are involved in the healthcare system is to help people get healthy and remain healthy, or is it to make a profit? And that, I think, is the biggest difference between our systems and some of the other systems. And I know what everybody's going to say, because I've gotten in these discussions numerous times. Oh well, if you have a system like Canada's or Europe's, then you're going to wait that much longer for your health care. If you have to get your knee replaced, then you could wait a year. No system is perfect, and it is unfortunate that the people in those places do have to wait for those things. But this is the United States of America, and I want to think that we can do better. We can
Yeah.
implement a system that would work for people and also eliminate those wait times, and figure out a way to do it better than some of those other countries. It's no offense to those other countries. I'm just saying, we have all this pride in our country and we believe we're the greatest. Well, let's act like it. Then let's go out and implement a system that you know will do these things we're talking about, and not have as many of the side benefits. We don't have to just accept that, well, if we go to that type of system, we'll have all the same problems everybody else does. Let's do better than that.
Right. No, I think that's a great point. I mean, if America's so exceptional and we've got such an awesome system on the for-profit side, why can't we come up with some version where we pick and choose the best parts of different systems out there and put something together that is really top notch, and then truly be the best in the world, not just spend the most in the world, but truly be the best in terms of outcomes and life expectancy and those types of things, where we're currently not. We spend more than anyone else, but we have worse outcomes. We have lower life expectancy than most other industrialized countries. One example that I really like is what Denmark does with their emergency care system, for example, where instead of just, let's say, you've got excuse me, you've got a hospital that's 5 miles away and you need to go to the ER. You don't just drive to that hospital and then try to figure it out once you get there. You actually call a hotline and they say, okay, what's your situation? You know, do a quick evaluation over the phone, and then obviously this is cases where it's not like literally life and death that very second. But they evaluate you really quickly over the phone and say, okay, there's 5 or 6 different places you could go within a reasonable period of time. This one might be a couple extra miles down the road. It'll take you a couple extra minutes to get there, but they also have capacity to see you. They also have a specialist that's working right now that can handle your specific issue. So don't go to the closer place, go to the place that's actually going to get you in and get you seen faster. So just little tweaks like that to a system that we have a lot of healthcare infrastructure in this country. Why not put it to better use and actually distribute the need to the actual where there's supply? So I think something like that is a public, again, universal healthcare, but based on supply and demand, and finding a way to balance those two concepts, I think is a really smart way to do it.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. And I think about, like, we've talked before. It seems like I mean, every exit I go down on the highway, when I get into the more urban areas around, it seems like there's a hospital, some kind of medical facility at every exit.
Hmm.
Some of them are related to each other, some of them aren't. Obviously, in a lot of cases, they're competing with each other. They're hoping you come to theirs and not the other one. But
Right.
but then if you have to, let's say in the example you gave, you go to the wrong one, or one that can't see you or can't treat you for a certain thing. Well, then what does that mean? That means a multiple thousands of dollars ambulance ride, maybe, depending on what's wrong with you, to another facility, or not that one you could have chosen to go to, but one affiliated with the one you originally went to, regardless of where it is. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And they'll keep you in their own system, obviously. Where,
Yeah.
to your point, if you'd have been given the choice up front, you might have just made a whole different decision from the beginning. But you'd have
Yeah.
to get everybody to play ball in that together. And to that, you'd have to have some sort of different centralized oversight system, or a leveling out of things where, again, like we've been saying, you're taking the competition out of it as much. You're making the focus
Hmm.
helping people versus profit. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
some
Well,
central
again,
players got to be involved. Go.
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. So that's where when you have a single payer, and then you realize that while you may not get, this patient or maybe the next patient, you're still in the system. You're still going to, in aggregate, have enough incoming patients to pay the bills, and you're going to be paid fairly because the government's the only payer. You don't have any health care or health insurance or pharmacy middlemen that are just bureaucrats in the middle, kind of putting their stamp on things and saying yes or no or maybe, and then you have to wait and all that. I mean, and to me that's another thing. You talked about how some other systems, let's take Canada for example, where maybe you do have to wait a little bit to get a procedure, but we have a we have wait times here too, and I mean that should be pretty obvious, but like anybody who's dealt with our healthcare system knows that sometimes you get care really quickly when you really need it. And that's the case over in those other countries as well. Based on the level of need and the severity of your situation, you're going to get seen faster or you're going to maybe wait a little bit. But because we have a health insurance middleman, you're also going to have wait times as while they go through prior authorizations and, oh no, you need to try this first before you get what your doctor says you really need. And so is that really in the to the benefit of you the patient, or is that to the benefit of a profit motivated middleman? And so, we're right back to wait times and being denied certain things that that your doctor says you need. And so there's wait times built into both systems. It's just it makes it feel like you have more choice and control because, oh, you can pick your insurance and you can pick your provider. Well, if they happen to be a network, and if they don't, then you're paying out of pocket. And so, there's caveats to everything, but there's wait times built into both systems.
For sure. That's one thing I was going to say too. If you have to go to a specialist for
Mm,
something, and you
hmm.
have to go to the one that's in your network, and you go to the one recommended, by whichever first level of healthcare you got, whether it was your doctor, or the emergency room, or whatever, then, I know people who situations where they need to go to a specialist, and it was like a 6-month wait to
Mm,
get into the specialist
hmm.
because they were so They were very good at what they did, which is great. You want that. There's no argument here that you don't want. We don't want unqualified people. We want very
Right.
very good medical professionals. But because they didn't really have a lot of choice, and that person was really good. Oh, and by the way, they worked like saw patients like 3 days a week or something because they were doing surgeries and stuff. Again,
Right.
all things that are going to be true in probably any system. But to your point, it was like I said, it was a 6 month wait to get to get in to see that specialist, and so they did have to go back and start asking some questions and talking to their initial provider and go, hey, is there another option I can go to? Is there someone else? And start to pick through that and say, I need this dealt with sooner. You know.
Yep.
So, but yeah,
Yep.
but perfect point. There's definitely
Yeah.
weights in both systems. It's just, and I think we don't understand all the nuances of that other system in a lot of cases. So we go, oh, that their wait times, that sounds terrible. We don't know what. I don't. I mean, I assume that's a lack of as many people in the like professionals in the healthcare system, lack of the robustness of the healthcare system. But I'll admit,
Hmm.
I don't know what. I don't know for sure what leads to those wait times in those other
Yeah.
places, but I think you just made the great point though. There's wait times here too. Maybe it's not
Yep.
as bad, but it's still not perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to where we were originally coming from with this is that regardless, because most people don't know, because I'm in the same boat, I don't know all the nuances of the, say, the Canadian system, for example, but the right sure as hell demonizes it and makes it seem like it's the worst because it's a government run system, not any other reasons, just because it's big government, inserting their bureaucratic whatever into the system, and that's automatically going to be worse because it's government run. Well, even there you could still have a more of a hybrid system where you have a public, where the government is the payer, is the single payer, but then you have partnerships with private industry and doctor groups. And we had talked about it before where the AFPI was suggesting like those essentially doctor collectives where you pay a membership fee, and there's different ways to do it where you still empower doctors to be entrepreneurs, to seek the best income they can, but really do what ultimately they want and they should want to do, which is give the best outcome to their patients and not have any middlemen telling them what they can or can't do. And so there's got to be a way to balance that out. And but again, you know, going again to go back, it's the right demonizing that entire system and saying there's no way it could work because the government doesn't know how to run anything. Well, again, why don't we take it and just make it the best it can be and figure out a way to do a hybrid system?
Why don't we make it a goal to figure it out instead of
Yeah,
just
we've
saying
got smart people.
instead of
Like
just
if
saying
we're
we
so damn
can't.
smart,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. But again, to our initial point, healthcare in this country very much still a right supported, right dictated thing. So the left has not taken over healthcare.
right, yeah.
What's our next one?
Yeah, yeah, no, let's I think that wrapped it up pretty well. So, um
How about
I
gun
think
control?
how about gun? Yeah, that's where I was going to go. Yeah, yeah, I think that's an area where again trying to conserve the sanctity of the Second Amendment, which again it's in the Constitution. You can interpret it different ways. The government, the Supreme Court has interpreted that in different ways, and but ultimately landed on continually expanding gun rights, individual gun rights over the years. I think it's important to abide by the Constitution and respect what it is. But I'm of the opinion that the Constitution is a living document. Things change. We had muskets back then, not AR-15. So
We didn't even have our own military back then.
yeah, that was the whole point, was to have not a standing army because they were afraid of that. They were afraid that that could come back and overturn the government. So let's actually have local militias that can be mobilized when needed and respond to situations on the ground and locally versus, yeah, some huge standing army that would just sit around and be bored and may decide to overthrow the government for kicks.
Yeah, I'd love to have a constitutional scholar come on here, but I don't think.
Jamie Raskin, let's get him.
Yeah, but if I understand it right, you as a citizen, had the right to own a gun so that you could be part of that militia, which would act
Mm-hmm.
on behalf of the state or the country per se, because again, we didn't have a standing military. It was not, I don't believe. Well, you did say, in case the military decided to overthrow the government, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, so, so the idea was you would potentially defend the government against, or you would act in a military's place to defend the country, though, but you would be called into service.
No, well, so the way I was thinking of it was not necessarily called into service against a military, but you wouldn't have a standing military in the first place. So
Right.
that
Yeah.
wouldn't even be a point because they were worried about what could happen if you just had a standing
But
military. Because if you look at examples, other contemporary examples at the time, there was a threat of military coups, and there still is. Honestly, I mean, you still see that
yeah,
in
but
21st century.
right. But the idea was you would act as a in the form of a militia for your country. You would do it to
Yeah,
serve your country,
yeah,
not fight against your government, which is how it
right.
seems to get interpreted or
Yeah,
interpreted. That's not word, interpreted. Um,
yeah,
quite often is I need this to stand up against the government. That doesn't sound like what it was intended for. It was to serve your country if
right.
called upon in the form of a militia, and they don't have their own arsenal, so therefore you have the right to bear a weapon to be used if your country calls upon you to serve. So I think
Yeah.
it seems to get twisted around
Oh
pretty
yeah.
well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would think if for whatever reason the founding fathers decided to give overt permission for random citizens to band together and try to overthrow the government, should they deem that the government's become tyrannical, then they would have put that in the Constitution very plainly. It wouldn't have been some random, comma here, you know, some random word there kind of thing that leads them to believe that it's totally fine to carry and have an arsenal so that way you can overthrow your government should you decide, or should someone else decide, oh hey, it's time for bloodshed, we have to take things and matters into our own hands. I would have thought that would have been very clearly stated in the Constitution, because that's something you don't want to screw around with. You don't want to leave that open to interpretation, because these are guys that are establishing the government. They're not just, throwing some ideas out there. They're just like, okay, this is the rules that we're going to run this government by. We're not going to put something in there that says, you know, citizens can just decide to break it all down if they figure, if they decide to. That seems counterintuitive.
Right. But to your point too, all anybody had back then was muskets, and I think the idea of somebody's going to
Mm-hmm.
go collect 100 muskets for their own personal arsenal is probably not realistic because they were all the same,
Yeah.
and obviously, they were seen as more of a tool then than a thing. Nowadays, guys have 100 guns and not think anything of it because they've got 100 different guns because there's so many on the market now because it's permeated our society
Mm-hmm.
so much. I think what are the statistics recently? Something like 6 guns to every person in the country or something like that. It's something crazy. Or every adult.
Ooh.
Maybe it's
Maybe
I
it's
don't know.
every adult, because I was, like
Yeah.
420 million guns to 330 million people, something like that.
Okay. All
Or
right.
400 million. Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is. So
But
yeah.
still, the ratio is just absurd. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just a shooting the other day in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to get into the specifics of that, but every time there's a shooting, it's not the right time to have the conversation. We can't talk about gun control. We got to thoughts and prayers for the victims, and my heart goes out to the victims, absolutely. But it's never
Mm-hmm.
the right time to talk about it. And then every time a Democrat gets elected, there's this panic that they're going to take all of our guns. There was this huge panic when Obama got elected. Oh, he's going to take our guns. If memory serves me right, and again, please people look it up. I believe he passed one thing related to guns, and that was he made it. I think he gave more freedom to carry it in like parks or something like that. He actually made it more lenient. any rules around guns, and didn't take them away. Same thing when Biden came into office. They're gonna take all of our guns away, and all these people go out and buy more guns because they're so sure that they're gonna get taken away. They're not gonna get, or at least you're not gonna be able to buy them anymore.
Yeah.
That's never happened, but yet we keep increasing the rate that guns are purchased and manufactured in this country. So much so that don't most of the like Mexican cartels and all those people have guns from our country? They're most of them are
Yeah.
armed with American weapons, and
Yep.
so we keep doing this. It's never the right time to talk about it. We've got so many guns in this country, even though, and there's not a lot of rules around, you have to do some background checks and again, I think some of it's state by state, but there's still, can't remember, did they close the gun show loophole officially? There used to be the thing where you could just go to a gun show and here's cash, give me a gun,
Yeah.
and there's no background check, there's no nothing. So there maybe that's tightened up. I don't remember for sure,
I
but
honestly don't remember either. I know Biden put in some things that were around, specifically around background checks, but I can't remember if that was also with the gun
yeah.
show
So
situation. But
yeah, but again, the point would be there's been little things that have poked into it a little bit, but for the most part, there's guns all over this country. We still have very much a right conservative national position on guns. We still have kids getting shot up in schools. We still have people getting shot up at shopping malls and different places, despite
yep.
the public sentiment being we should have more common sense gun control. Maybe we should limit access to assault weapons, stuff designed for military purposes. But none of that has been put in place.
Yep.
I think the only thing is that's potentially true is you technically can't have a fully automatic weapon as a personal citizen, but you can have like that. That
Right.
was the whole bump stock debate, right? Is the bump
Yeah.
stocks essentially made a semi-automatic rifle act like a fully automatic rifle, just do the recoil.
Yeah.
It just used the recoil to be ready to fire off the next shot.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people maybe don't know a lot about guns, and I grew up rural enough that I shot a few in my day, but and I'm not necessarily opposed to guns. That's the thing I want to make clear. Like, I'm not opposed to hunting, self-defense, sensible gun ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like one or two. You know
Yep.
what I mean? I personally don't think people need 100. If I always try to make this analogy. You walk in somebody's house and they have 100 like teapots or something like that around, and you go, man, this person's like really into teapots. Like, are they maybe okay? You know what I mean? Are they just that passionate about teapots? If they are, that's fine. Hey, to each their own. But nobody thinks it's a sign when somebody has 100 guns that maybe there's something we should be concerned about. You know what I mean? That maybe they're just gun collectors. Sure. Again, it's to each their own, but nobody seems to ask the same kind of questions when somebody compulsively has like a crap load of guns.
Yep.
But it happens in this country. Sorry if that offends anybody out there, but I just think it's something we might want to start asking some questions about. Is does anybody need 100, 100 guns?
Right.
But just to the point, it's still very much we have a gun culture, which is very much a conservative right ideology and thought process. The left has not won on that one.
Yeah. Agreed. And even when it comes to like things like red flag laws, like those are being pushed hard against. And I know some states have those, but I don't know to what level the federal system is weighed in on that. But I mean, that seems like very common sense. Again, as long as it's implemented the right way. I know I fully agree with the idea that if there's a known threat and you have the opportunity to remove weapons from that threatening environment, that you should do it. And that should be perfectly fine. It should be reviewable, it should go through the process. But red flag laws are a great step to take in trying to use common sense, in removing weapons from a person that appears to be a threat to themselves or to others in a known way, not just speculating offhand comments, etc. But there are a number of situations where I think red flag laws were fully enforced, instead of being again demonized like as a way to unconstitutionally take away someone's weapons. Well, just think about like domestic violence cases where that's the number one situation where if there's a gun involved and you've got an abusive partner, then that's has a very high chance of ending in murder. And so if you know that, if you know the statistics, it's not just a hunch, it's not just some feeling like, oh, I feel like we should take this guy's guns. No, if he's making threats, if he's known to be an abusive partner, that
He
person
or
should
she,
not have weapons. Right, exactly. It goes both ways for
anyone.
sure. Yeah, any person that is in that situation and has a weapon, I think you should be able to say, even if it's just for a short period of time until you can really adjudicate the situation, but say you don't have the right to have this weapon because statistically this is not likely to end well. And that's the other thing too. I mean, I think when the left talks about like common sense gun reforms, and I think that's really the way to look at it. Is it's not radical. It's just saying, if you were in this situation yourself, how would you like to respond to that? If you had a sister that was being abused by a boyfriend and you knew he had a firearm, would you stand for that? Would you just sit around and do nothing? Would you just hope for the best? Or would common sense tell you, let's do something about this? And I don't know. That one really gets to me a lot. I think how, again, that's demonized by the right is, again, another way to just pull people's guns. So, like, it's not happening willy nilly. And in fact, I think it's very difficult to get the approval to take someone's guns away under red flag laws, and rightly so, I think, because you don't want that to happen just left and right. You want that to be a considered process. But to what you were saying earlier too about just the gun culture and how that's a very conservative kind of thing. It's always been seen as a conservative right, and the NRA has become, obviously more of a Second Amendment absolutist organization, but was always like more of a rural, like, a gun, not celebrating guns, but respecting guns and thinking of as a nice hobby and a good skill to have and a wholesome endeavor. But now it's become this absolutist organization, and with this ideology that your rights as a gun owner goes above the lives of your neighbors, goes above the lives and well-being of everyone else, anyone else, that your right as a gun owner trumps human life. And I have a I have a big problem with that. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Well, then mostly I agree, and I think that I don't know. There's that whole saying of well, anything to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, and
Hmm.
it's like in so many cases, hey, if that can happen, if a let's say a off-duty police officer has a weapon and is able to resolve a situation, or maybe somebody with some military experience is able to resolve a situation quickly and cleanly. Great, great, but I don't need some Rambo wannabe with a little bit of training, whipping a gun out in a situation where maybe he or she shouldn't. It's not,
Hmm.
thinking he's going to save the day and make matters worse. Plus, you hear all the time when they talk about like mass shootings and stuff that even if you're the good guy with a gun, if you pull out a gun to try to resolve it, but the police are coming in, they don't know, and they don't know who the shooter is, and they see you with a
Right.
gun, they just shoot you instead. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So, and that's assuming the police go in. Like we could get into the
Right.
whole Uvalde situation where they just opted not to. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. It's just a sticky situation. But our point being, example number two of where this part of society and is still very much permeated by conservative ideology, and the left has not taken over. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean, really, the most like radical, crazy ideas are maybe what, like gun buybacks, like go, try to do some things like Australia did after they had a terrible mass shooting, and they've had very little or maybe even none since then, because they did voluntary gun buybacks. If you wanted to, you don't have to, but voluntary gun buybacks, and then common sense regulations on the weapons that were still out there. It can be done, people. It can be done. We just choose not to. And I think, again, that goes ultimately, I don't want to spin this too far down the road, but I think that ultimately goes back to money in politics, which we've talked about a lot, because the gun lobby is a really, really powerful force. There's a ton of money in the gun industry, and they have corrupted so many politicians to toe that line and to, again, conserve the status quo there and not make any changes, any common sense reforms. Because, if you give an inch, you give a mile, whatever. I think that money is just such a powerful influence that it stops any kind of consensus among politicians to make some of those common sense changes.
It's not just the NRA, but it's also the military contractors. Because I remember hearing some
Oh, yeah.
reports several years ago about how, like we have basically the militarization of a lot of our police forces. And a lot of that is because there's so much equipment and guns getting produced because of the defense contracts that
Mm-hmm.
essentially the military doesn't even, and again, people, look up the stuff. I'm going off the top of my head. I have literally no notes for this conversation. But there's so much equipment produced that the military doesn't need it all. Now it trickles down to, okay, well, who needs it? Who else could need it next? Oh, how about the police force? And then you get the militarization of these police forces. Well, then, hey, if they don't have need for everything, I mean, you could just ask the basic question: why do we make military grade weapons and put them on the market for anybody to be able to get their hands on?
Yeah, these aren't defensive weapons in a lot of cases. These are offensive weapons
Yeah,
designed to just kill as many people as quickly as possible.
yeah, yeah. AR-15 is designed to shred bodies into
Mm-hmm.
pieces.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe you should. Maybe this might be controversial. I'm throwing it out there. Maybe in the vein of the original Second Amendment in the Constitution, maybe it should be tied to some sort of service. You may only
Yeah.
qualify to handle this weapon if you are doing it in the service of your country, or you have put in that time, whether it be military, police, whatever. You've put in that time and earned the right to have this weapon. But if you haven't, maybe you don't. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Pay to play
Yep.
in a way, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm sure that
Yeah.
won't go over very well.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, do you want to shift to another
Sure.
topic? Anything you have in mind?
Well, the other one that jumps out to me, honestly, is, we talk about the economy just in general.
Mm.
And, we touched on a little bit in our little pre-conversation we were doing is, you know, everybody's bracing for, another round of huge tax cuts coming that are probably mostly going to benefit the wealthy. And we've done that a few different times now. We have this long running, yet to be proven true philosophy of trickle down economics that every time, certain party gets in office, they want to cut taxes. Not always cut spending. There's some conversations right now about cutting spending, which we won't dig into at the moment. But there's always this want to cut taxes, and like I said, especially on the wealthy, with the idea that they'll just turn around and create jobs, and that wealth will trickle down to everybody. I think we've seen, with the stagnation of wages essentially since the Reagan era, relative to the overall economy. I think we've seen that doesn't happen, but yet we still end up doing these same maneuvers every time of cutting taxes. Anytime Democrats get in there and want to raise taxes and have the perfectly good plans behind that to to try to build up certain aspects of the economy, whether it fund certain programs, that meets a lot of resistance. So it's just another place where I would say, like, those ideas are popular, they pull well, but it hasn't permeated into government action. Those elected to represent us aren't taking those actions, the action isn't matching the popularity of the initiatives. So it's another place where, like I said, conservative ideology essentially continues to rule. The left has
Yep.
not taken over. We've had some initiatives, right? We've had Biden's, the IRA, the Infrastructure
Hmm.
Act essentially got, like, the original Build Back Better was kiboshed, at least, by technically two air quote Democrats, but very much
Yeah.
conservative leaning, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema helped kibosh that. We kept some of the infrastructure parts of it. Infrastructure should not be bipartisan. I mean, everybody needs better roads and bridges and stuff, and
You mean it should not be partisan.
sorry,
You
sorry,
want it to
sorry.
be bipartisan.
Thank you, thank you.
But I knew what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for the correction, though. Yeah,
Yeah.
should not be partisan, should be bipartisan.
Yes.
Um, but
Yeah, it
yet,
shouldn't be political at all.
right. And then you hear all those cases, and I just got to vent about this for a second, where Republicans who voted against the act then go to places in their home districts where money from it is getting spent on projects, and they're at the ribbon cutting, acting like they should get some credit for the act passing. Yet they voted.
Yeah.
Yet they voted against it. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? And it's still talked about in a very negative light, even though it's had a lot of, you know, a lot of there's it seems like there's popular reaction to some of the things that have taken place individually, but
Yeah.
as a whole, it's talked about very negatively. It's not celebrated as part of Biden's achievements with the economy. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that mindset, again, I would argue, is where conservative ideology has still rules our society. The left has not taken over, you know, economics is this big thing you've got to fight back from. It's still very much a conservatively run economy as a whole. And so if you don't like it, you should probably think about some of what we're some of what we're saying here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like to what you were saying too, the taxing the rich at an appropriate rate and using that money for things that the country needs and that individual people need, safety net programs, infrastructure, more of from the Build Back Better original agenda. Those are That's a very popular concept. I think most people in the country, the vast majority would say tax the rich appropriately, tax corporations appropriately, allow them to make a profit, but not gouge, not have some, ungodly amount of profits that they're just going to use for stock buybacks and instead of investing in wages or capital improvements for the company or, investing in their workers,
Serving
you
their
know,
customers appropriately. If we go back to
yeah,
if we go back to the healthcare,
yeah, yeah.
we don't
Instead, their
have to, but
customers, right? No, their customers are their shareholders. That's who the priority is. It's not the customers. It's not the patients. It's not the workers. It's the shareholders, the board, the CEOs. So yeah, I think it's extremely popular. And again, that ties us back into what we've been saying all along too, is that so many of so many progressive policy ideas are super popular, and we don't see them. We sometimes hear again a few politicians talk about them on the left. Bernie Sanders, great example, someone that's been principled, that's always stood by his progressive philosophy, even though he's an independent senator, technically caucuses with the left. But someone like Bernie Sanders, AOC, Ro Khanna, Jasmine Crockett, like some of these, especially these younger politicians now that I think should be the future of the Democratic Party, instead are being frozen out of leadership positions. AOC just got blocked from being the House Oversight Committee sub chair, whatever it's called when you're
yeah,
not in the majority, but the leading Democrat in
yep.
that committee, which is a very powerful committee, and we're someone where we're going to need someone that has a powerful voice, that has a following, that is fiery, that will fight back against a lot of the stuff that's coming up in this next administration. So she was frozen out in place for someone or in the place of someone that's 74 years old, this crusty old Democrat that's I've never heard of the guy in my life. And so we're going to rely on him to be the fighter. And the dude's got cancer too. Like, is he really up for this fight? Like, I feel bad for him, but at the same time, I want AOC. I want someone like her in there for the fight. But anyway, where I'm going with this overall is even on the Democratic side, the progressive, the left position is tamped down, is not even respected enough to give a leadership position. It's all about the centrists, it's the corporate Democrats, it's the money, who can raise the most money. So even on the left, or even
Yeah,
on the Democratic side, the left isn't a strong or powerful voice. It doesn't have the influence that we would like it to have. So, let alone, compared to what the right's doing and how the right demonizes the left and everything, the Democrats won't even give their own members a level of influence that they should have.
that's one reason in this conversation I've been trying to kind of not say Republican Democrat so much as left, right, conservative,
Yeah.
progressive, because yeah, when you get to the parties, yeah, there's certain behavior in both parties that we,
Mm-hmm.
admittedly don't like. Something you and I touched on again in our little pre-conversation was I have often said I wish that the left would go back to the Obama healthcare situation. I wish they would actually stake positions on the left, on the far left, and run on them, because then when the Republicans are running on the far right, you can meet in the middle. And even then, I think people can become more aware and educated about some of those left positions, because to your point, they are popular. But
Mm-hmm.
then what you get is you get the Democrats trying to take sort of a center left position versus the Republicans taking a far right position, but telling you they're running against a far left position, trying to paint
Yeah.
the Democrats as the far leftists that they're not acting like, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
don't you get to hear all the bad about far left positions, but not actually any of the good that could come out of it, or again, what good that could come out of compromising the two
Right.
a bit.
Meeting in the middle to help the most people.
Yes, yes,
Or
but
potentially at least the large number of people
yeah,
versus
yeah,
just the handful. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. But I like I said, the Democrats play a bad game often by, like I said, not actually staking themselves on those left positions, staking themselves more in the center. But then the right does a successful job of running against far left positions that the left's not even espousing. Right?
Right.
And so they might as well. This is what I've been saying for a
Mm-hmm.
couple election cycles now. They might as well, because that's what they're having to run against anyway, is this perception of the far left. Well, you might as well go out and represent it well and correctly, then let people truly decide.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an awesome point. I think that's perfect because regardless of what the Democrats run on, they're going to be called far left. They're going to be called communist. So
Just be
not
it. Just
yeah,
not
don't
communist, but you know what I mean.
right, not
Like, go
communist.
actually
Yeah.
embrace those positions and run on them,
Yeah,
and then
because
let
they are
people.
so popular.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I was going to bring up the example real quick before we're done here with when there was Kamala's campaign and she was talking about trying to ban price gouging at the federal level, whereas there's a lot of legislation at the states that ban price gouging, but in an effort to try to control out of control, groceries and everyday staples, price anti-price gouging legislation. And so what did Trump say? What did the right say? Oh, price controls, communism, comrade Kamala, all that shit. So again, trying to demonize what is a very popular, very common sense approach to a problem, not radical at all, but then mislabeling it and confusing the voters in terms of what actually the policy really is.
And now there's an admission from the right that oh well, it looks like we might not really be able to do something about grocery prices after all.
Yeah,
Because
that's really hard.
once
Yeah.
they're up, and
Yeah.
they don't want to tell you that it's because now the corporations that raise those prices aren't going to turn around and give anything back.
Right. Even though
Um,
they have that in their power to do,
yeah, yeah.
that's where
So
the power lies.
isn't that convenient that that whole
Hmm.
premise of winning on the economy just may not be something that they ever could have done anything about,
Yeah.
or definitely weren't going to try to. Um,
Right.
I know we want to close here pretty soon. I want to mention
Yeah.
just the fourth thing real quick, and we don't have to go super into it if we don't want to. But the other thing I'm going to throw out there is I still think very much uh, influenced by the conservative side, although I know plenty of people on all sides that participate. But let's talk about religion for a second. I
Mm.
mean, you and I have talked about this before. We are arguably by definition not a Christian, not technically a Christian nation. I know some people like to argue that, but there's separation of church and state. There's no established religion. However, we are very much a culturally Christian nation, as established by what our holidays are: Christmas,
Yeah.
Easter. A lot of religious influence in those. Those have not been taken away. I know several years ago there was declared, a war on Christmas, mostly by the defenders of Christmas. There was never a war on Christmas. Again, there was a push for some inclusivity to say, if I tell you happy holidays, it's because I mean the best for you, and for you to accept that whichever holiday you celebrate is
Yeah.
okay, and I wish that for you. But some took offense if you didn't say Merry Christmas to them, if that was their preferred thing,
Hmm.
and thus then the war on Christmas was born.
It
Well,
was Bill O'Reilly, wasn't it?
yeah,
Kind of who
I think
started that way back then,
probably,
and then carried on since then.
yeah,
Like
yeah, but
every year, it's a war on Christmas.
yeah, but now I just want to say, this is by my observation, that I'm pretty sure that before Halloween even came along, there was Christmas decorations in the store. Um, Christmas music on the radio before, at the beginning of November. Thanksgiving is practically an afterthought at this point.
Hmm.
Another holiday that I've seen in some circles try to get pushed as more of a religious holiday than it's been traditionally understood to be, as it was the Pilgrims who were actually thanking God versus the Indians that and Native Americans that
Mm.
helped them. But we can dig into that another day if we want to as well. But just to say that the war on Christmas was like not a thing. Christmas is still very much safe. Our the We're still very much a conservatively Christian nation, which is, I would argue, culturally Christian is what I meant to say, but also
Hmm.
conservative to some.
Yeah.
So the left did not win on that one. The left has not taken over. Again, their whole push was for just decency and inclusivity. Enjoy whatever holidays you want. You're free to do so, but that alone is taken as some insult by some.
Yeah.
So just again, another thing that jumps out to me is where the left has not taken over our society. So I still beg the question, if and people can leave comments or whatever, but tell us where we're wrong. Like, if the
Hmm.
left took over, we're not seeing it. Tell us where we're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great way to finish it up. But yeah, I mean, I think it's funny how a lot of times the right will talk about how the left is ramming, transgender ideology down our throats, and the women in or men in women's sports, and the DEI and CRT, and how all this stuff is just being slammed down everyone's throats and no one wants it. And like, well, what about your religion? What about your ideology? How are you not also trying to force that into places where it shouldn't be, where it has no business being, like Bibles in Oklahoma schools, and, the 10 Commandments outside of a courthouse in Mississippi? And no, don't you see that that's the exact same thing? You're shoving that ideology down our throats too, and claiming that the founding fathers were all Christian and this was founded as a Christian nation. And again, from a cultural perspective, Triple M, you're totally right. That's just how it's come about. But don't, they shouldn't also forget that that was the whole point of America's founding in the first place, was to get away from anyone telling you what you should believe or what you shouldn't believe. That's why we're independent in the first place, is because we didn't want to be under a king that told us what religion that we should have. And so, yeah, that's
Oh,
why
that's
we're
a
here in
great.
the first place.
Yeah, thank you. I as I was thinking about this conversation leading up to it, I had the cramming down our throats sting in my head, and it didn't come to me as we were talking, but it does make me think of that whole Bud Light Dylan Mulvaney thing that was a
Hmm.
hot thing, a year and a half ago, and I was a few different places where I literally heard people saying exactly what you said. Well, they're just trying to cram this transgender business down our throats and this and that. And it's like, I would love to know the answer, and I'm not saying it's zero, but I would love to know the answer of how many people who got up in arms about that actually saw any of the advertising or the Bud Light stuff associated with Dylan Mulvaney actually pop up organically in their feeds, in their whatever, versus them being told about it by some outlet that wanted them to
Hmm.
be mad about it, to where it
Yeah.
actually showed up for them and they saw it and they go, oh geez, I don't like that, and to where there would be any merit to them saying it's crammed down our throat. Because if you didn't even know about it and if you didn't see it organically, then it's not exactly being crammed down your throat.
Right.
So let's
Yeah.
just stop overreacting. And to something else you just said, and again, I don't know, maybe I'm in the mood to piss people off lately, but I don't know. I couldn't help but think the other day I was driving down the road and I saw a Gadsden flag. Don't tread on me. And
Hmm.
the thing that jumped out of my head I said to myself, it doesn't say don't tread on us. It just says don't tread on me. So don't do anything I don't like. But
Hmm.
if you tread on other people, so be it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And if you really had the feelings of, liberty and freedom, it would be like don't tread on anybody, right?
Yeah,
But there seems
totally.
to be this okay feeling that as long as you're not treading on me, I don't care what you do to everybody else. And
Hmm.
maybe that's something that we could all think a little differently.
Yeah. I think that's a great point to end on there. And again, once again, everybody, we thank you for tuning in. We've had an awesome time doing these shows, and had really fun with this one. So, thanks again. Have an awesome holidays, whatever holidays you celebrate,
Happy holidays,
and
everyone.
yeah. And we'll see you again next time. Take care.